So, as Pastor Nicole said, All Saints Day was on Friday. So, what did you all do to celebrate? It's okay. Yeah, you didn't have school. That's right. Wow. So, you don't have any special traditions for All Saints Day? That is so disrespectful, people. You That's cheating. You know that All Saints Day is one of the very first Christian holidays? Like, it goes Easter, Christmas, All Saints Day. Before all of the others, we were celebrating it was Martyrs Day back then. It was celebrating all of the martyrs from that last year. But we've been celebrating All Saints Day for like 1,700 years, and y'all don't have any traditions? That is shameful, people. If we were in Sicily, you'd be eating bone cookies right now. And if you were in parts of Germany, you'd be making pretzels that look like dead people. Like, not like in general dead people, but specific dead people. Like, you'd have bakers who are like, I need you to make me a pretzel that looks like my Aunt Susan. And then you eat them. Yes, you eat your Aunt Susan pretzel. Oh, and you buy shoes in Sicily. All Souls Day? Oh, come on. Come on, Sicilians, you can do better. When your country looks like a boot, you got to just buy shoes all the time, right? Well, in America, we don't really celebrate All Saints Day, do we? It's just kind of there. It's like the sugar hangover from Halloween. It's all Hallows Eve and not any All Hallows Day in America. But I want to change that a little bit today. I want to kind of focus in on All Saints Day, because I don't know if you've noticed, but things are a little tense in the world right now. People are freaking out a little bit. Some people in this room I have heard freaking out a little bit already today. And that's fine. Oh, Charlie's giving me a thumbs up. He freaks out every day. It's just a part of being alive, right? Well, these are uncertain times, are they not? Both in Mario 64 and in the world at large. And I find one of the best ways to make it through uncertain times is to look back at formerly uncertain times. Truly, these are unprecedented days we're living in, but there were unprecedented days before as well. There shall be unprecedented days in the future, God willing, at least for the cockroaches and the horseshoe crabs. So I find, and this is just the way my brain works, that I find comfort in looking backwards at times. Looking backwards at those who came before us and how they lived through what felt like the end of their world as well. So I wanted to tell you a little story about a saint that we never talk about, and that hopefully you will talk about a little bit more afterwards today. His name is Saint Moses the Black. Which, great name to give to a guy, right? St. Moses the Black was born in about 332 AD, so 1,700 years ago. This is before the Roman Empire took over Christianity. This is in the very early days of the church. He was born in Ethiopia. He was massive, he was at least 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet taller than almost everyone else around him. Broad shoulders, huge muscles, just a tank of a human. Like, he walks in the room like The Rock and is just, whoa. He was kidnapped at a young age, and he was sold into slavery in Egypt, where he served a rich man who lived on the Nile. And he proved himself to be an awful servant because he was violent, and he had a short temper, and he was terrifying because he was so huge. So after he had killed a man while he was under this guy's service, the rich man just said, you know what? You're done. You're gone. Here's your freedom. I don't want to deal with you anymore. Go out into the world. I never want to see you again. So he traveled up the Nile towards Alexandria, where he mixed in with the wrong crowd. found himself in a violent gang of people who would ransack houses, who would steal, who would hurt, who would kill, who would just do whatever they wanted to. There were 75 of them, and he quickly found himself as the leader of that gang, which became the most ferocious gang along the Nile. People would tell stories about them up and down the Nile. People would cry that the gang was coming, that there's 75 of these men led by this monster of a man who was ruthless and could tear you limb from limb. And one day he was on the run from a group of armed soldiers who were looking for him, and he hid in a monastery, as one does. Now, this was before there were established religious orders. So don't imagine, like a Franciscan monk or something like that. These were the very first monks. And what they were people who had seen that the church was starting to get a little bit opulent. They were starting to get a little bit too involved with power. They're getting a little bit too comfortable. The message of Jesus was getting a little bit lost in the consumerism and in the power, if you can imagine such a thing. So they went off into the desert by themselves, and they gathered in these small communes. They didn't have a whole lot of money and stuff, but they just lived solitary lives in their own little cells, and they got together for meals. They were the very first monks. They call them the desert fathers and mothers. So he runs out into the desert, finds one of these compounds, and hides there. And the monks, when they see him coming, this massive, violent man that everybody knew who he was, they said, "Yeah, sure, come on in. We got you. There's an open room here, actually. There's an open cell where, we have space if you want to come." And so they hid him there. And he was so shocked because that was not what he was expecting. I imagine he was expecting to come in and be like, "Hide me." And they're like, "No." And he's like, "Roar." And then they're like, "Oh, no, okay, fine." And then they begrudgingly do it. But instead, they showed him just this amazing hospitality and love. And they treated him like he was special, like he was good. And for the first time in a long time, he was treated as if he had value and not just something to be afraid of. And so that changed him. And he never left the monastery. And he lived in that room. And that became his cell, his self-imposed cell. And a little while later, some of his fellow gang members came to find him, found what was happening, and planned to rob the monastery themselves at night. And he woke up and he saw them, and he captured them and tied them up and dragged them with ropes to the monks who were praying and said, "I found these robbers here meaning to do you harm, but it seems like the Christ-like thing," and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm very new to this, but it seems like the Christ-like thing to let them go and not to punish them, right? And they were like, "Yeah, no, that seems fine. So they made dinner. They made dinner for the robbers, and they blessed them and they prayed for them, and the robbers were so thrown off by this that they stayed. And then this happened a third time until there were 75 former gang members who had joined this small group, and now it was bursting at the seams. Actually, the Pope himself came to Egypt and ordained Moses the Black as a priest, giving him the ability to baptize and ordain other people, which, you probably don't know this, is unheard of for the Desert Fathers. Monks did not get ordained as priests because they didn't have a congregation. But Moses had a congregation because all of these former violent gang members that society was afraid of and looked down on and treated like monsters, he treated like beloved children of God and welcomed them in, and they were changed because of it. There's a great story of one time in which he wanted to be transformed. He wanted to be able to wake up one morning and be a different person. He wanted to be forgiving. He wanted to be done with all of his lusts and his worldly ways as he saw them, but he just couldn't. And he felt like he was a failure, and every other monk there could do it except for him. And there was something wrong with him, that he couldn't leave behind his former self. So he used to beat himself up about it, and he had these voices telling him that he didn't belong among the holy people, and he should just go back out and do his thing somewhere else. This isn't working out. So one of the elders took him onto the roof at sunrise, and they just sat in silence and watched the sunrise. You know how nature has a way of speaking to your heart in a way that words can't. And after an hour or so, the elder turned to him and just said, "Only slowly do the rays of sun drive away the night and usher in a new day, and thus only slowly does one become a perfect contemplative." And so he did, slowly, imperfectly, bumblingly, inconsistently. Humility, patience, and dramatic nonviolence became his driving forces. There was another time where one of his brothers in the monastery had committed a very bad offense. We're not recorded what it was. Whether, I don't know, he was eating on the Sabbath or he stole from something. We don't know. It was enough that all of the other brothers and elders came together in a trial to convict him and essentially kick him out of the compound. And so he filled a wicker basket or a pot or a bag, however it is that it's described in a bunch of different ways, filled it with sand. And remember, this guy is 1.5 feet taller than everyone. And so he's carrying this massive sack of sand on his back as he walks slowly from his room to the place where the trial was being held, dropping sand all along the way. And when he got there, and the elder in charge said, "What are you doing?" he said to them, "My sins run out behind me, and I do not see them. But today I am coming to judge the errors of another." Oh, that's a good one. And so the elders got together and they canceled the judgment entirely. And they all took instead a fast in order to discover their own sins and pride and take care of themselves first before they accused their brother of something else. And then in the end, after a long life of this, as a 75-year-old man, a group of young and violent criminals attacked the monastery. And he forbade any of his monks from fighting back. He said to them, "Jesus said that those who live by the sword will die by the sword, and I do not want that future for any of you. But this is my past and this is my future, so I will stand here." And so he and a handful of others who didn't want to leave stood there at the gates with arms wide open and no weapons while the other monks got out. And while it had worked several other times with other robbers and murderers, the result was different this time, and he was killed at the door. But in that final act of resistance, his story became like the seeds of a dandelion spread out throughout all of the Nile. His story of resistance spread, and his example caused countless people to drop their weapons and to come together instead. I love Moses, and I need to hear the story of someone like Moses today as I try to navigate the world that I find myself in. If I could describe Moses in 2 words, I would call him humble and disarming. He was humble because he knew where he came from. He knew that he had changed. He wasn't the person he was before, and that gave him perspective. And that gave him grace for others who were where he was. This is why I keep all of my old journals around too, which if you're ever tempted to throw away old journals, don't do it, because they are records that I am now not who I was then. In fact, the person I was then would be appalled at the person I am now, just as I am appalled at that guy. It wasn't that long ago that I was protesting out in front of Planned Parenthood with my proudly wearing my Second Amendment and Jesus t-shirt and seeing no contradiction. I was, as best as I knew, a loving person who wanted the best for everyone. I felt a deep love for my common person, whether they believed or voted the same way that I did. And so I have to then assume that my current enemy likewise has that same heart. Because I did. And I've got the receipts to prove it. And that might be naive, and that might be silly, and you might be sitting there thinking, no, maybe you were one of the good ones, but that's why you came to this side eventually, and all the bad ones stay over there. But I just don't think that's true. If I can change, anyone can change. He was humble, and he was disarming. Did you catch the ways that he disrupted the expectations and he gave his enemy a chance to be better? The robbers who came to the monastery the first time expected violence to be returned for violence. They were ready for a fist fight. He might have lost if he had fought back because they were prepared to fight back. But instead of fighting back, he gave them dinner. They weren't ready for dinner. And so the surprise caused their walls to come down for a moment so that grace could sneak in through the gates. And that's who I want to be in this time and place. That's how I want to be remembered, as a disarming presence. Someone who gets under the defenses and holds the gate open so that grace can squeeze its way in and do its little works of sabotage on the inside. I think about this a lot, actually. I think about this anytime that I do a funeral, because the next time that you're at a funeral, pay attention to this. The same maybe 3, 4, 5 adjectives will be used over and over and over again to describe the person. And clearly, you cannot describe a person in all of their complexity with just a handful of words. We all know that's not true. But we all do it anyway. You know, I did a funeral a few days ago for a 95-year-old woman. 95 years she had lived multitudes of lives during that. And I heard at that funeral over and over and over again that she was organized, that she was a caretaker, and that she was loving, and that she was organized. And one more organized. She had taken the time to pick out her own earrings for her funeral that matched her coffin. She went out and got glamour shots the year before because she thought that the end was coming and wanted to make sure that she looked good for the paper. Organized. Right? We can all, at the end of our very complex lives, be described in a couple of ways, because memory has a way of shaving off the edges of a human life, doesn't it? Of taking all of the complexities away and just making you more of a simple example to be remembered. So I think about this a lot. I think about, what will the adjectives be used at my funeral? How will I be described generations hence? What 3 or 4 or 5 words will people use to describe me? Because honestly, in many ways, that's up to me to figure out. There's not a lot in this world that I can control. I tell this to my boys all the time. You can't control the weather. You can't control your luck. You can't control other people, politics, traffic. You can control almost nothing. The only thing that you can control is how we choose to respond to what is given to us. How do we respond in the moment? This is the only thing that we can control, and that will dictate how we are remembered in the future. You won't be remembered because you were really lucky and you lived a fortunate life. It'll be how you responded to that luck that you were remembered. So let's try a thought experiment. We've taken some time to think about the people in the past that have made us who we are and that we're grateful for, and whose memory we draw inspiration from for our current time. But let's look forward. How do you want future generations to remember you? What words or phrases do you want to be attached to you during your eulogy? What kind of ancestor do you hope to be?